To speak on the tackling the gender super gap bill, something I speak of with enormous pride, because this bill goes to the heart of fairness, of equity and recognition of the sacrifices that are made within Australian families, and it represents a genuine step forward to ensuring that every single Australian can look forward to a dignified and secure retirement, especially women. This bill amends the superannuation legislation to give spouses the opportunity to split their collective superannuation balances evenly between them. The partner with the higher superannuation balance will be able to roll over an amount from their fund to their spouse's superannuation fund to make the two funds more even. Financial security in retirement should reflect a lifetime of shared contributions, not just paid employment. This bill is a proactive measure designed specifically to tackle one of the most persistent and unfair challenges in our superannuation system, the gender super gap. While estimates vary, women retire with significantly lower superannuation balances than men, somewhere between 20 to 25% lower. And why is this? Well, it's rarely a result of personal choice. It rather stems from deep-seated structural realities in our society and in our superannuation system. According to the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, 1/3 of the gender super gap can be attributed to time spent caring for family and interruptions to full-time employment. Women are far more likely to take time out of the paid workforce to care for children, to care for elderly parents, and to shoulder the responsibilities of unpaid work that keep families and indeed our economy running. When one partner, typically the mother, takes time away from work to raise children, her superannuation savings often halt for years, even decades, while her partner's continues to grow. This is what is known as the motherhood penalty, and it's actually in action leaving women financially vulnerable in their later years. And the Prime Minister himself has acknowledged that no mother should be penalised for taking time away from work to do the most important job that there is. And let's be honest, these decisions, these sacrifices, they benefit both partners in a relationship. They're not individual choices, they're family choices. So why should the financial security that comes at the end of a working life reflect only one person's income rather than the partnership that made that life possible? This bill creates a simple and entirely voluntary mechanism for fairness that makes it possible for couples to split their balances evenly between them. The person with the larger balance can add to their super fund balance of their spouse using money that's already in their superannuation, rather than through making additional contributions from outside of super. And that way they can both retire on an equal footing. It's important to understand that this bill is specifically about splitting balances. It's not about superannuation contributions. This is an important distinction to make because that mechanism is one that already exists. It exists to make contributions on behalf of a spouse. However, the take-up of this mechanism is incredibly low. Only about 1.1% of Australians used it in 2021-22. Now, why is that? It's because it's clunky, it's complex, and eligibility is very, very limited. And there's a complete lack of awareness, and critically, there's no real incentives for most people to use it. This is about splitting balances using a rollover from one fund to another. And it's a genuine structural change to our superannuation system that directly tackles the gender super gap, which is one of the systemic structural failures of our superannuation system. And it uses existing mechanisms to do this. Already in Australia, equitable splitting of superannuation is considered during divorce proceedings, so the rails are there. This used in the old days to require a court order, but that's no longer the case. There are now standard forms and recognised tax treatments of a rollover amount into a super account from one partner to another at the end of a relationship. So why not allow it to occur during a relationship? Why not make this a proactive, voluntary planning, system to plan an accessible part of the whole superannuation system from the very outset from the very outset, allowing couples to make these decisions for themselves when they suit the couple to do so. Let me be clear. This does not force a couple to do anything. It simply gives families an option, the option to share what they've built together in recognition of unpaid labour, of broken work patterns and the professional sacrifices that so often falls to women. The Tackling the Gender Super Gap Bill explicitly recognises the economic partnership that's at the heart of most families. It empowers couples to plan for their retirement together, collectively, allowing for a more even distribution of superannuation during the accumulation phase. To maintain integrity in the superannuation system, this bill includes guardrails and limitations on how the mechanism can be used. First, and this is very important, the amount transferred from one spouse to another spouse is not considered a contribution. Rather, it's treated as a rollover. It's considered to be rolled over. Now, this distinction is particularly important because it ensures that the amount transferred between spouses does not attract or avoid any additional taxes. Second, the amount that's rolled over from one spouse to another retains its original characteristics. Specifically, it retains the fund's proportion of concessional versus non-concessional components. Now, this is important, and it's an important guardrail because it means that when somebody dies, the amount that's been transferred doesn't have additional tax benefits to beneficiaries. Third, the ability to roll over amount from one spouse to another is only available to those transferring from or to a defined contribution scheme. It's not available to those that are in a defined benefit scheme that is far too complicated and restrictive. And fourth, the ability to roll over from one spouse to another is only available to those couples that have one superannuation fund each. Again, and both of those funds must be in an accumulation phase. And finally, the mechanism can only be available to to those that have one superannuation fund each. And why this is an important integrity measure is because there may be unintended consequences in the calculation of how much can be rolled over from one account to another for persons that have multiple funds. So these are the guardrails around this bill that will ensure its integrity. Six, the amount that can only be rolled over from one spouse to another is limited, and it's limited in two ways. The amount that's rolled over from the original fund cannot leave the original fund with a lower balance than the receiving fund. It's all about evening up your balances. It's not about using this opportunity to roll everything from one account into another. And second, the amount that's rolled over cannot cause the receiving fund to have a higher balance than the transfer balance cap. Now, the transfer balance cap is currently at $2 million, but it's an indexed amount. We don't want to attract additional taxes by having this mechanism in place. For example, and I'm using very big balances here as an example, but obviously this is something that is available to anybody, no matter what their balance is. For example, if person A had, as I said, it's a big balance, $5.5 million in their superannuation fund, person B had $500,000 in their superannuation fund. That means that person A can roll over up to $1.5 million into person B's account. That brings person B's account up to that transfer balance cap of $2 million for the current financial year. Alternatively, if person A has $2 million in their superannuation account and person B has $500,000, $500,000 in their account, person A can roll over up to $750,000 to person B, and that brings both balances up to $1.25 million. This limits the amount that can be rolled over from one spouse to another, and they are ceilings, but they're not floors. Spouses might choose, for whatever reason, to roll over an amount that is lower than that spousal redistribution limit. So if it's within the rules, a couple has the opportunity to make their balances even, but it's entirely up to the couple how much they want to transfer between them. So, for instance, a couple could choose to do a one-off single lump sum rollover, or alternatively take the opportunity to utilise the mechanism each year to make a spousal redistribution rollover of smaller amounts, or they can choose to not do it at all. And while the examples, as I said, are very large, they're certainly not limited to people that have low balances, because, let's face it, that might be a very attractive mechanism to those couples for whom equality and fairness is profoundly important. It's all about choice. It's about allowing couples to manage their collective retirement savings to reflect their collective choices throughout their lives. And the benefits of this reform are clear and far-reaching, because it's about more than just superannuation. It's about closing that gender super gap. Because even though the gender pay gap, on average, weekly earnings has come down from around 18.5% in 2014 to around 11.5% now, the gender retirement gap remains stubbornly wide. Stubbornly wide. Tax Office data shows the difference between the average super balances of men and women over every age category was 26% in 2014. And in March of this year, Minister for Women, Katie Gallagher, reported that women still have 21.3% less superannuation than men. So when you unpack that Tax Office data further, the gap is even worse for older women, those women that are approaching retirement, those women that haven't had the benefit of part-time work or flexible working options or childcare as part of their working life. This contributes to the alarming fact that women over the age of 55 are the fastest growing group experiencing homelessness in Australia. And members from both sides of this place have rightly observed that the relationship between lower retirement savings and homelessness in women is direct and clear. So while the difference between men and women's super balances is lower for women in their 20s and 30s, between the ages of 40 and 64 that gap is much more pronounced, averaging between 23 and 24%, and it's hardly changed over a decade. This is the structural inequities within our society reflected in our retirement outcomes. Let me be clear. The goal here is not to penalise men or to privilege women. It's about acknowledging the value of caregiving and ensuring that those who take on these vital responsibilities are not financially disadvantaged in their retirement. A more equitable superannuation system benefits not only women, but also families, also communities, also the economy as a whole. This is good for wives, it's good for husbands, it's good for families. The gender super gap isn't going to close itself. It's not going to happen on its own unless we do something about it. It requires deliberate and equitable policy interventions like the one set out in this bill. The changes to superannuation that have been proposed and that are contemplated by those opposite are only about how the government can get their hands on more super, how they can tax your super more. But those sorts of changes do nothing to support the integrity of the system. It only risks the integrity of the system. If Labor really wanted to do something for super, they should be looking about how they can make the system fairer. Now, they will tell you that they put superannuation on paid parental leave, but that's such a narrow-cast policy. It only deals with women that are having children today. It does nothing for the women that have had children earlier, that are still within working age, that are still within the superannuation system, but are suffering from that gender pay gap. And, let's be honest, it doesn't even touch the sides. And yet it costs the budget around $2 billion. This doesn't cost anything like that, nothing like that, because this is all about couples using their own money to make decisions, not taxpayer money. It's about their own money to make these decisions. It's a well-acknowledged fact that more work is needed to equalise super balances between men and women. And there's a very intelligent woman named Rebecca Pritchard, who's a senior advisor, financial advisor with an organisation called Rising Tide. She has quite a high media profile in the financial advice industry. She said that more changes were needed and a lot can be done on the gender side of things. This is a gender super gap is still, and the word she used is hideous. This bill, Tackling the Gender Super Gap Bill, is an opportunity for our parliament to come together to genuinely improve the retirement outcomes for all Australians and help tackle the gender super gap, that intractable problem. Let's not accept a system that punishes women for caring for children. Let's not allow inequality in retirement to be inevitable. We can change it, so why not change it now? I urge this parliament to support this bill for a fairer, more dignified retirement for every single Australian, but particularly for Australian women. I commend this bill to the Senate.